So I think it's probably time to give the floor to Jake Hartnell from Hypothesis.
Annotation, architecture. Let's go. At Jake Hartnell. I'm a science fiction writer. Here's a shameless plug for my book, 23rd Century Romance. You should all buy it. But as such, I love imagining the future. The future is a very exciting thing. So let's imagine a future. Ooh, there goes my microphone. Let's imagine a future with a truly read-write web, all one word. Let's make a private annotation, use a little bit of time travel, and go to the browser of 2018. That sounds exciting. Few things have changed. Web annotation is successfully implemented in browsers and reading applications. We can now address things not just on the granularity of a page, but of anything on that page. Wow, that was easy. And here we are, browser of 2018. It kind of looks suspiciously like 2014. My Photoshop skills need some work. Also, I want to do quicker mock-ups. And it kind of looks like the Hypothesis extension. But here we are on Ars Technica looking at a document from also 2014. And we make a selection. And then what do we do with the selection? Well, we maybe press a keyboard shortcut, or we press a button. But voila, we open up an HTML authoring tool. So we start writing a web document. Inside of this web document is a little selection that we just copied over. Like many other websites, Ars Technica employs a system of voluntary user logins. And in fact, there might be multiple selections that this person chooses to drag in to this editor. It's reflowable, so you can resize it and change where it falls on the screen. But we're creating an HTML document, and inside the document are, annotations, selections, advanced sort of links. And so what happens when you make this annotation? Well, the browser captures the selection information, which it passes to this new HTML document. Maybe this selection information inside this new HTML document appears as an annotation object, perhaps an annotation web component that contains all the necessary information for selection. Now, this is where things get interesting, and this is kind of what I want to talk about mostly. This document must be stored somewhere. And I think one of the things that we should sort of think about is the idea of maybe like channels, aka annotation document stores. Each channel can have a variety of settings associated with it, offer features like groups or custom editors. We've been talking a lot today about things that can be done on the back end or via additional services versus what are the minimal requirements that W3 needs to provide in the browser to, for example, capture the selection data. But each channel can be geared towards its own personal use case. I think one of the things we've also seen a lot is that annotation has many use cases, and whether you're doing scientific research or like classroom learning, the interfaces, the kit you want around annotation is going to change. And then finally, I think a big part of it, and I'll show some mock-ups, is that users should be able to control which annotation channels they subscribe to. I think certainly every annotation should be ideally discoverable from every page, but most people don't want that. So here in the browser of the future, it's Chrome. We've opened it up, and there's a section called Annotations, and these are all the different channels. There's like Hypothesis, and edX has one, and then there's a Rap Genius channel, and maybe a Microsoft Office channel. A whole bunch of people are providing additional content, additional services, all using sort of annotation technology, which sort of plugs into the browser. And then this comes into reading annotations. So when the browser loads a page, it queries all the channels the user is listening on, based on whatever channels they subscribe to. There could even be meta channels, for example, that manage where you have like a smaller group of like 2 people, for instance, or they sort of aggregate all your different channels into like one neat service, kind of like with RSS streams, actually. Anyway, it then queries all the channels the user is listening on, so like annotations.hypothesis, annotations.rapgenius, and these annotation documents are loaded into a sidebar or some other. Oh, I'm talking too loudly.
No, you're running out of time.
Oh, cool. And then annotation documents are loaded into some sidebar or other place where they can be seen, and then we can filter. The goal is, I think, when we're designing these interfaces, we need to design things where we can easily switch between like sort of social context or even different service provider sort of context. So like here we've got this page and we're looking at like a Rap Genius sort of channel, and then in the top right there's like a selector by where we can sort of change the channel or group or what is appearing and gets attached to the page. And we have a bunch of different tools for filtering and finding relevant information. How do these document connections to I'm just going to cut it to the chase because I'm almost out of time. So in summary, I think there are three matters that we should talk about a little bit more. I think we have been talking about annotation as advanced linking. You know, the ideal is that we should be able to link to anchor to any selection on a page. And I think we're kind of in agreement that this is something that, you know, this is something the browser should handle. It should help with the selection and inversely the attachment of annotations. I think two is sort of user control, and this is what I was trying to suggest by the idea of channels. We want to give people the greatest amount of control in managing what they see. In a sense, like you join an edX course, for example, and they ask for permission to like add their annotation channel to you know, like whatever you're listening to. I think these kind of principles are really important for combating noise. And then finally, I think one that is maybe the most controversial is, I think, but also I think important and worthy of discussing, is the browser should provide a space for some of this stuff. You know, where do these attached documents live, and where are they viewed? Additionally, I think it should also be a store for personal documents and notes. But going back to the major point is, like, you know, if we're attaching this content, it's coming in from all these different places. Perhaps we need a space for these associated documents to live, and I think that might be an interesting discussion. And that we need people to be able to link their thoughts to things. Yay. That ends.
Thanks, Jake. Oh, jeez. So do we have any questions? I think I see at least a couple.
Well, real quick, it's interesting to hear you talk about the user control and the idea of channels. Traditionally, in a lot of domains, the documents have controlled, the repositories of the documents have controlled where the annotations are. And I actually think there needs to be a compromise there. So I may normally subscribe to Channel X that has lots of things I usually look at and annotations about those things. But I'm looking at a document that I don't usually look at. And if I want to know more about who's annotating and what's annotating that, it may be better if the document can kind of inform me. I'm being annotated on these channels.
Yeah, I think actually there will probably be services. I imagine Google and other indexers will be interested in indexing annotations and then allowing for additional discoverability beyond what you subscribe to. That'd be just a sort of guess on that first.
Thanks, Tim. Oh. Say your name.
This is Barbara Tien with Ponga. Mm-hmm. First, I really appreciate your introducing it from the perspective of a future world view and a what-if future. Nice touch. Oh, it did get me thinking, though, as we talk about the problem of trolls, for example, in terms of commentaries, to put this in a very direct political context. I love your idea of channels and describing channels, but if you'll forgive the politics to this, if you can imagine a Fox News filter on top of a White House website, or you can imagine a few reverses on that as well.
I think this is an excellent commentary on society. I think it's important, though. I think this is just the fact of the matter is that for good and for worse, these people are going to choose the moderation policies that best suit their needs. Peer review moderation policies are going to be totally different from like general discussion or even like sort of funny stuff. Peer review is going to be different from Rap Genius. People are going to have different models of adding secondary content, might even specialize in a certain type of style or commentary or political slant. And I think as architects of the system, like as much as I would say, like I totally agree with you. I'm very liberal myself. but I don't think it's for us to like really weigh in. The important thing is just give the tools that like allow for the variety, and I think that the main questions are just again like space, art, coming up with some system by which we can get mostly the relevant annotations on the page. I think the idea that annotations could be indexed and then be searchable by Google, for example, I could like just query, like what else is on this page? I think that there's additional services that can provide that, but I think there's still some thinking to do in terms of like especially where these documents live. Like, I think this is a good question for like even browser vendors. I mean, this is almost like UI kind of stuff, but like we're attaching all these things to various documents. How do we see them? Like what space do we get for them to live? How do we make it? Maybe we allow for a whole bunch of different options.
Hi, Philippe Aigrin. I particularly like your idea at the end of a space for attached documents / notes, and actually there is an historical model for that, which is the Commonplace book. Yeah. And it's too bad that for example, Zotero, when they implemented the quote facility in Zotero, they made that a kind of subsidiary functionality to reference, which I believe it is not. I think it's much more important than reference. And taking seriously this historical reference would mean thinking that this space must be your own. It must be absolutely, because it's critical to your personal thinking. And then it can be published like Locke did, or his publisher, or it can be shared, it can be searchable, but before that it must be your own. But it must be in a space on which you have sovereign control.
Yeah. Definitely.
Very, very important question. It deals with the issue of a bigger problem we're trying to solve, data about how you actually quantify point of view and information, kind of like you do if you're trying to go from east to west. If someone could, using a browser standard, discover or declare their point of view, like left of center, right of center, centrist on this, in a calculated, data-structured way, like ML language, and then say, out of that, I want to have conversations with others who do, you could solve the potential harm in what she mentioned by being a thing where people can pre-decide who they want to talk to. Yep. Are they open to anyone? And because the browser standard supports things like local storage, they could say, I'm going to let you see my annotations if I approve you, like they do with Bitcoin security across things like Ripple, or not. Or I want to store our discussion because it's shared metadata. Yeah, or I want to copy from the site all the discussions, or make myself announce myself available either through things like sockets or WebRTC in a browser to browser and with SQLite, and actually be able to moderate and be a part of long-running discussions. It'd be the real dream when we had things like feeds that actually let us do some really cool stuff, which we now have the technology to do. It doesn't have to run on somebody's cloud. You actually can own that data and that generated metadata or that contributed metadata, which is very interesting. You could even see where you're at versus others from a data centrist on the discussion spot polling. It'd be very, very interesting.
Cool. Just want to add, I guess, one last thing that sort of came up in mind. I think Nick asked a really profound question, especially related to bookmarklets and extensions. And I think the question of space is also like sort of related to this question of like, where can we actually put this stuff, like in the browser? I think a lot of times extensions, as we go on, as we slowly like step forward and iterate over the design process, like coming up with the minimal sort of standards, but then like going into things that are more complex, like that essential question of space. That how can we allow people to like have a model where you can allow certain people to add like highlights and stuff to your page. Different kinds of, like you're allowing external services to interact with the page you're currently on. I think that there's probably some interesting discussion happening on that. I'd love to talk with people more about this later. Thank you.
We have one more.
Oh.
Say your name, please.
I'm Genesis. I know you probably got bombarded with questions, but one question I wanted to ask that actually no one really had asked was, how do we encourage participation and lower the barrier to entry where young people like myself, I have a lot of people that are May age, that it takes, they have a lot of things to say, but they install a new app or a new tool, that's been very difficult for them. So how do you encourage participation and gather data from a market that's, roughly that age of not wanting to experiment things besides Facebook and games and whatnot? Well, I guess to cite, I can't believe I'm going to reference them in this talk, but I mean, look at something like Rap Genius. That I think when you give developers and people the tools with which to do these kind of things, that people will go out there and create sort of innovative situations that do sort of vibe with younger generations. I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do with annotation, and if you can make it, if you can give developers the tools, they'll create things that are relevant to the youth and that are as easy to use as possible. And yeah, I think that's.
I have a particular take on that. I sort of like, if we can get annotations in the browser, and if we can make it easy to discover channels, then it's as easy as using a browser.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but even Chrome extensions, you have to discover that there's a Chrome extension.
Yeah, you mentioned Rap Genius. If you had a window that popped up like chat does, when you say on the page, just like you say, I want to use locations, you want to be a part of a discussion on this thing, and it just worked, which is technically possible with JavaScript and with the browser support, it would be like, do you want to have a discussion with somebody on this? It'd be like data-driven chat roulette, which a lot of kids actually use.
So you're saying live dynamic chat with some kind of
Well, because
Okay.